Moving countries can be one of the most exciting and most challenging things you'll ever do. And we're here to take one big worry off your plate: your taxes. At Expat Taxes, we understand the complexities of Irish tax from your perspective as an expat and tailor our advice to your needs. With decades of expertise, our team at Expat Taxes will help you navigate tax residency, cross-border taxation, reliefs and returns, and will work with your country's tax advisor to make sure your taxes are sorted. Whether you're an individual or a corporation coming from Australia, the United States, the UK, or anywhere in the world, we want to help you. So visit us at expattaxes.ie to book a consultation today, and let's make moving to Ireland easier together.
Welcome to Tax Bites for Expats, the top tax tips you want to know as an expat. The podcast is here to help answer the common queries and concerns expats have when moving to or from Ireland. Complex taxes explained simply. We'll focus on the Irish and international tax issues to be aware of to ensure you save time, money, and stress.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Tax Bites for Expats. Today we're speaking with Tim Heulin, founder and CEO of Daysium, an app that enables people to log on and track their tax residence. In a previous life, Tim was an airline pilot for 22 years, so he's familiar with moving across borders and the tax implications that come with that. But he got a bit bored of completing all the spreadsheets that tracked his presence and whereabouts, so he decided to build an app. And today we're going to talk about that and how it might be of interest to some of our listeners. So thank you so much for joining us, Tim. It's really, really nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Did I pronounce your second name correctly? Because, in Ireland, we have funny ways of saying second names sometimes when they're in our native language.
You did a pretty good job.
Did I?
Heulin is the pronunciation. It's an old Jersey name, which is where I'm from, the Channel Islands. Yeah.
Okay, so you're in Jersey at the moment. So maybe that leads nicely into a bit about you. Tell us about you and your background, because, I find it very interesting. I think our listeners will as well.
So I sort of grew up in Jersey. I'm from, my father's side of the family have been here for generations, and left school and decided I was going to travel around. So traveling's always been something I've been interested in. I spent 4 years working as a ski photographer in ski resorts in the French Alps, and then summers back in Jersey. So whilst my mates were at uni, I was skiing predominantly, which suited me fine. And then worked for national newspapers in the UK for a little bit. So moved to the UK for a time. Worked for the Times and the Mail on Sunday, and then kind of thought, well, I probably need to get a slightly more sensible job. So had a couple of mates who were pilots, and they said, you'll easily get a job in Jersey. The local airline was recruiting, so I kind of did my commercial pilot's license quite quickly, quite spontaneously, and got a job based in Jersey with an airline. I did a couple of years there, and then moved from Jersey to the UK and started with a bigger airline. European carrier, and spent the best part of just over 20 years with them, and right up until COVID happened, and then we all got furloughed, which I suppose is where the Daysium story begins.
Yeah. So I suppose as a pilot moving quite frequently, Daysium, the concept links in very much with your previous job as a pilot. Tell us a little bit about Daysium and how being a pilot gave you the idea.
So once we were everyone was all pilots in the world basically were furloughed. I kind of just didn't fancy sitting around for 6 months to find that literally aviation worldwide had come to a clattering halt and be made redundant effectively. So I was keen to start a business. I'd always sort of dabbled in tech businesses and had ideas, and I kept on coming back to this idea of having a black box for business. We have a black box in an aircraft which is designed to basically contain what happens so that we can learn from it, and it can also preempt things that are about to go wrong as well. So the idea of having that in a business seemed to be quite an interesting sort of topic, and we quickly established, talking to various software people and friends who are in the dev industry, that data doesn't behave very well. So plugging a black box into a business is not something you can actually create. But I had a chance conversation with a friend of mine who worked in a family office, and she was saying, we needed a black box for our business because we had a tax inquiry, and it literally resulted in boxes and boxes of paperwork, a photocopier, and I had to hire an additional office and some people to go through it over years and years of paperwork, trying to just satisfy the questions from this tax inspector. So we kind of went down this tax use case rabbit hole with that, bringing that kind of past of aviation with me as to how we could kind of create something. And then at the same time, I was just acutely aware of having moved from the UK back to Jersey after about 4 years of the statutory residence test, and then having to be really careful with the number of days I could spend back in the UK, but also affected by the fact that I was a pilot. So there's additional rules that were there. So there's a real kind of juggling game of keeping a logbook for my flying hours, and then alongside that a sort of spreadsheet to count my days in the UK and make sure I didn't go over any limits. And it was a real kind of challenge to wrap your head around all of those rules, and a pretty clunky, time-consuming process, wondering if you kind of got it right or not.
And that's common, I think, in terms of people generally. One of the first questions they'll have is, am I tax resident of a jurisdiction? And unfortunately, it's not simple to answer that question generally, because each jurisdiction has their own rules. So I think what you're alluding to there is, in the UK, the rules they're quite convoluted, really, aren't they? There's quite a few tests, and I'm not an expert in them by any means, but it sounds to me like Daysium is trying to offer technology to simplify the record keeping purposes that go with this question of, have I become a tax resident somewhere? Is that really what the app is trying to do?
Yeah, exactly. So what tends to happen is, for me, for example, I went to a tax advisor. I told them what my situation was, what I wanted to achieve. I was told what the rules were, and the advice was, and keep records. And I thought, well, that's great, I can keep records. And you see this commonly if you just Google statutory residence test in the UK, you'll get all of the firms will give their own advice, not advice, but they will describe the rules to you, and they'll say, and keep records. And if you go to HMRC's website, they define the law and they say, and keep records. And everyone starts off with the best of intentions, but without the container for that data and documentation, but more importantly, the process as to how do you keep and gather that stuff, and what is important and how do you do it. People are kind of left to make it up themselves, and depending on your I suppose your tech savviness will be dependent on the quality of the data that you collect. And one of the things that we realised is, from talking to contentious tax experts who we sort of partner with through Daysium, was that counting your days and having a boarding pass doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean you were on that flight. It doesn't mean you left the UK. All it means is that you bought a ticket and you obtained a boarding pass. And so for high net worth people, where a tax investigation can become quite granular in the evidence that you need to produce to satisfy the inspector, this kind of information is really crucial. And what tends to happen is we have to go back through years of paperwork trying to fill in the gaps and answer the questions, when really what you can have is a coded application that logs your travel, prompts you to upload your boarding passes, and enables you to evidence where you were, so that should an investigation happen, in the event of, in inverted commas, your crash, which is the similarity between the black box, your black box contains everything, all of your data and documentation, to basically say to an inspector, here we go, there's nothing to see here, we've got everything. And that frees up everybody just to move on, go back to the business that they're in. So we sit right in the middle of that process between tax inspectors, advisors, and the clients.
And I think as well, from a revenues perspective, let's say from an Irish point of view, we've had queries for clients before, maybe where we're trying to demonstrate they were or were not in Ireland. And to your point about, we'll keep records, what does that mean? Daysium, as I understand it, is collecting a lot of the information that we as advisors would love our clients to have to hand. And some of the very organised clients will have beautiful spreadsheets with evidence. But the problem, I suppose, often comes with, if there's a question raised about a long time ago. So maybe by a long time, I mean like more than 18 months ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It becomes a bit more difficult then, doesn't it, if you haven't been organised? So obviously, Daysium's going to retain information for quite a period of time. Who do you think your ideal client is? Is it somebody who's frequently coming and going, or what's the use case, do you think, predominantly for it?
So I think it's anybody who's crossing borders. We're focusing on the high net worth market at the moment, purely because they're the ones that we can help the most by having this ability to evidence the travel. So if you're somebody who's looking to move, to perhaps exit a business, to move to a different tax jurisdiction, you will naturally go and get tax advice. At the very least, you really should go and get tax advice. That kicks off the sort of Daysium process of establishing the rules with your advisor. Once we know what those rules are, so for example, in Ireland, perhaps you're working towards the 183-day test. You can't exceed 183 days. So we will set that tax rule up inside the app the Daysium app, which will say you can't go more than 182 days. And we know what a day means, and we know what a tax year is, so we can count days for that. We could also do Schengen. We could also do UK. UK tax rules are different, but we count per rule. That's coded into it. So once that's established, then you can just go and travel, and we log movement. So throughout the day, you'll get various commercial business addresses which will appear on a timeline that you are in that approximate location. And then you have the choice to verify that location to say, well, actually, that was my accountant's I was at, and I was there for a meeting. So you can then say that you were specifically at a specific address. You could then upload data and documentation to corroborate that. So if you go to an airport, you might add your boarding pass to it, which is fine. And then you get on board the aircraft. And if you take a selfie and add it to that location, then we're using geotag technology to show that that photo was taken, you're in it, and quite clearly you're on board the aeroplane at the time. And then we go through this sort of process of that's the evidencing side. And then at the end of the tax year, we can report on all the days, or in fact, you can do it at any time with your advisor so they can see how many days you've done. Then we go back to the beginning of the process again. You sort of review and establish the rules that affect you for the next year.
It's brilliant. So it's a really robust record that you have. And I suppose it's going to offer comfort to people that if a question ever comes, they have a lovely, as you said, black box to produce. Our experience would be when these discussions start with revenue about, where were you and what were you doing? It doesn't surprise me to hear the example you gave earlier of somebody who was in a family office and who said that it went on for a long time trying to evidence, proof. So, there's a saying that kind of comes up in tax. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. So that element of proof is really solid. And I think with Daysium, and I think as well, it obviously for these high net worth individuals who are moving frequently, one of the things that kind of comes up in my mind when you explain the situation of, the use case being a high net worth individual who travels a lot, there's a very common scenario we can have, particularly between Ireland and the UK, whereby an individual is potentially moving back and forth into Ireland to work, and they could be going to the UK for various reasons. And it's possible, it's not a foregone conclusion, but it's possible that they can become a resident in both jurisdictions. And then we fall into some more complicated technical analysis to actually work out where they're going to be taxed. And really what that means is how much taxes are they going to pay? Because in that scenario, then one country is going to get the right to tax them. So the use case, I think, is exponential, but it's really good to hear that you've noted it down to, this cohort initially, who I think are going to be very interested to hear that the technology exists and it's being tested and used.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that because we have partners who are tax advisors and accountancy firms that we sell via, essentially, so they introduce us is the way that we work, means that we get a lot of specific understanding of the problems that the clients face, but also tax legislation. We can get a deep understanding of that in various tax jurisdictions. So in the example you gave, where you have somebody a client in Ireland, a client in the UK, well, we have a partner network, so we will be able to actually pass that data to a partner firm in the UK for them to get their expertise from it. At the moment, it would seem as though, and another example would be you just decide to move from Ireland and go to Portugal. So now what would happen is you may introduce them to a partner firm in Portugal, but then the whole process would start again. You go, well, okay, so what is your background? Where have you been? And we can now condense this by having this body of evidence that can just be accessed by the new partner firm, and you can have a more seamless sort of transition from one firm to another, which we think can be quite attractive.
Yeah, definitely. What do you envisage? What are your hopes for this? Do you see this as being something that's, European wide? Is this a global app, or is the sky the limit at the moment? It's to be decided.
Yeah, definitely a global app. We're starting in Jersey and Ireland on a sort of small scale and rolling things out there, really just to make sure the customer experience is as good as it possibly can be, and understanding some of the concerns, issues. We're talking about quite sensitive data, so we need to have, just from a sort of a communications perspective and explaining and storytelling perspective, what's going on with this thing. So we want to work really closely with our partner firms and their clients to really understand the issues. But once we've done that, we can then scale that globally. Fundamentally, the way the app is built is that we could just import tax legislation to it, find a partner firm, let's say in Portugal, who says, yep, these are the rules that you've interpreted, and this is our interpretation of them, most importantly, and we can adjust them subtly if that's the case, because some of them are grey areas. And then we've got a rule set that we know is robust for Portugal, for example, and that can be done all over the world. So yeah, the sky is the limit in many ways. The pilot in me, the skeptical one, wants to be sure that high net worth individuals are going to have this on their phone and use it. And that's going to take my cynical mind quite some time to be convinced of that before I get too excited about how big it could get.
I think the main concern people would have, and I know we've spoken about this previously. So firstly, how do people know that the data that they share is safe? Because I don't particularly enjoy when Google timeline tells me where I was. I feel it's intrusive. Tell me what you see as being able to kind of reassure people that this isn't going to be some kind of a way for someone else to look over their shoulder unless they've actually given them access.
Yeah, so all of the data is encrypted. That's sort of standard stuff these days. So, and it's also decoupled from the identity of the person. So, if there was a data breach, for example, that's designed so that it makes no sense, it's completely useless to anybody, and that's fairly standard in software these days. So there's sort of industry standards, and the company who or developers have worked in financial services applications for many years. So we've got a robust and good expertise in creating that itself. Ultimately, if you were to give your password away for your phone, and of course anyone can access it and anyone can see anything that's on there. But if you don't do that, then it's for your eyes only, just in the same way that you don't have to share any data currently that you don't want to. It can be, you share what you want with your advisor. And so there's that sort of level of security. It's entirely up to you what you do with it. You are the data's yours, and we are the guardians of that data. Mm. But it could come down to a very granular piece of evidence that you need to make sure that you didn't exceed 90 days in the UK. Which might be the argument, and where you were fundamentally on that day and what you were doing on that day could be absolutely critical, as we know from previous tax investigations.
And in terms of, I suppose, what you see the usage of the app looking like, you mentioned earlier that it will register commercial addresses, for example, as you ping close to them. So let's give an example. We have a client who maybe has travelled from Ireland to Gatwick and they spend 2 weeks working in the UK. Just talk me through what you think they're going to need to do in terms of the app. How many times do they need to pick their phone up and actually click into this app to get what they need from it for the black box?
So the answer to that is really down to the individual. That's entirely up to them. They could do nothing with it. It could sit in their pocket, and as long as they had the location services enabled, then we'll just count days wherever the phone goes. But as we said, that only proves where the phone was, which is not the best in terms of evidencing. So, for example, then what would be fairly standard is you arrive at the airport in, let's say, Dublin, going to the UK, and you would upload your boarding pass, take a photo of yourself in the airport or the airport itself. That would show that you had left Ireland, and then when you arrive in the UK, you could add a photo of something in the UK. A receipt would be absolutely fine as well, because that shows that you're making a bank transaction at a coffee shop in London, for example. And really, it just goes from there. It's entirely up to you how much you use it. The more that you do, the better the evidence will be. And in fact, we're working on an algorithm that will score that risk or evidential status, I suppose, the quality of the data. So that something on the roadmap is that we'll be able to say to a tax authority, this guy's a sort of 8.7. Do you really want to investigate too much? Because all the data's there. I mean, does this really represent a genuine risk of non-compliance? And so what we hope for that will be, it'll be a deterrent, but will enable tax authorities to sort of deploy their dwindling resources on genuine risks of non-compliance, and not just sort of randomly scattergun approach, hoping that if they just keep digging long enough, they'll find something, which doesn't seem like a very good use of anyone's time and is incredibly expensive and stressful for those involved.
Is that a common thing to see from a UK perspective? I can comment from an Irish perspective, but is it common to see HMRC going down that digging route where they're challenging not very robust evidence?
It seems to be. So anecdotally, what we're told by our partners who've sort of experienced in this, particularly ones looking in after the contentious tax sort of experts. Yeah, there is. I mean, we've got one story where it came down to, after about 3 years of probing as to how many days did you spend in the UK, and the allegation that they'd exceeded that, it came to, well, where was your private jet? Was it inside or outside of UK airspace at midnight? Which was a very sort of binary event. It's either is or it isn't. So you either owe the tax or you don't owe the tax. And that was incredibly difficult to go and get, this is 15 years ago, trying to get radar reports to find out where the aircraft was. And that's fine. That is the law, where if you were inside, you do owe it. But it's the process and the time that it took to keep getting to that level was really difficult. And quite often, there isn't any tax to pay. And all that's happened is you've been paying hundreds of pounds an hour to be represented. And it's a huge waste of the tax authority's time going after somebody, when if you have this contemporaneous body of digital evidence which is robust and you can quickly show them, they can be satisfied that this person has a sort of exemplary posture towards their tax and tax obligations, and their time's probably better spent elsewhere. So our clients are only people who wish to be good.
Of course.
If you want to game the system, that's not for us.
No, of course. And I think, from our perspective, it's difficult to communicate to clients sometimes just how tedious it can be to deal with revenue, frankly. When we get into these kind of back and forth, it can go on for months and months. It can, it can take time to get a reply. So you're entirely right. Even if it's a favourable outcome for the client, it's not going to be a favourable outcome for their pocket, because obviously somebody has to deal with this, whether it's often clients say to us that they try initially to deal with the situation and they just run out of energy or knowledge, and then they come to us. So I think you're entirely right. Even if the answer is, well, there's no tax and there never was, being able to, shortcut that process and just go, well, look, here's the report. It's invaluable. I think there's probably lots of people listening to this, and from an Irish perspective, I'm looking forward to seeing the app go live soon, which I know it is. And it's something that we've been involved with at Expat Taxes. I see that there will be lots of people who are planning a move to Ireland, or who maybe spend time in Ireland as well as in other jurisdictions, with an eye on when their tax residency is going to be triggered. And I really see that they're going to be keen to learn more about the app. Tell people who are listening who want to learn a bit more about you and the team where they can find the information, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So you can find us at daysium.com. That's daysium.com. That's our website there, and you can sign up and join the waitlist. So we've got an increases by numbers on a daily basis at the moment from all parts of the world of people who are interested in getting there. As I mentioned, we're trying to do this in a very structured way. So the demand is high, but we want to make sure that everyone has a good experience with it. So you can join the waitlist and we'll get to you as soon as we can. Currently, we're just onboarding through partner firms. So if you happen to be listening and you're an accountant or tax advisor, then you can also, through the website, apply to become a partner. And we can have a chat and see if that might be a good fit.
Well, it's really exciting. It's really exciting. I think our clients and others alike who listen to the podcast are going to hear lots more about Daysium as things progress. And we feel very lucky that Ireland is one of the first places it's being rolled out, because, we really see this shift where, and we really try to be at the forefront of it insofar as possible, where we kind of, digitalise whatever we can. And ultimately, I think, the days of having a paper diary or an Excel spreadsheet to document anything you do in life, they're leaving us. So what I see this as is, reducing stress for people, giving them clarity, and essentially saving them money. If a question ever comes, it's probably difficult to quantify just how much of a stress reliever and cost saver this technology could be. So thank you so much for explaining more about it, and look forward to hearing more as the app is rolled out.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast, and it's great to talk about it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for listening to Tax Bites for Expats. Please do leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast. And as always, remember to take professional tax advice specific to your personal circumstances before acting or refraining from action in connection with the matters dealt with in this series. The material in this podcast is intended to give general guidance only.